Welcome to the 902 Podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain Vik, and I want to thank you for listening. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. This episode discusses suicide. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also text HOME, HOME, to 741-741 or visit speakingofsuicide.com/resources for additional information. Welcome to the 902 podcast. We're in studio today. Sheriff Wagner, Chief Deputy Houchin are here. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hey, it's Friday.
We also have the Nebraska LOSS Team with us today, Cynthia Surrounded and Belau. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dig into the meat and potatoes of what loss is, why don't we get to know you guys just a little bit? Where are you from? What do you do? How did you get involved with loss? Who wants to go first?
You want me to go first? Oh, goodness, a long time ago. I've been part of almost since the beginning, and my first career before I became a teacher was in law enforcement. Oh. So I lost, I'm a survivor of 2 family members and also a coworker. So when this came up, I actually got the information from a fellow student.
Okay.
So that was really cool. Coming from Miami, Florida, and then been here. I'm a Lincolnite, Nebraska now, for 20-some years. So I have to say I'm from Lincoln.
So do you miss the warm winters down there, or?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I lived there for, I lived there for just about 10 years. I'm originally from South Dakota. So,
oh, okay.
So, Hurricane Andrew. I'm a survivor of Hurricane
Wow.
Andrew.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, I just aged me.
Wow. So. Okay. Don, how about you? Where are you from?
I'm from here, Lincoln. Live in Lincoln. I practice as a school psychologist and been involved with developing what is called local outreach to suicide loss survivors teams here in Lincoln for a number of years and across Nebraska and across the country. In fact, the LOSS Team movement is a movement that has been underway for a number of years across the country. So what I do is I work with in a variety of settings, and as a school psychologist, I'm able to work with adults and children in a variety of different situations and crises, and oftentimes I'm involved in supporting children and youth who have experienced in their families suicide loss, and they themselves may not have the verbal skills to express themselves relating to that loss, and so I'm able, with my experience and training, to be able to help them and school districts with that particular experience. But what we're here today to do is to talk about local outreach to suicide survivors, and Lincoln was the first team in Nebraska.
Really?
They got started. Yes.
Well, that's a great segue into the program itself. So why don't we talk a little bit about what is a LOSS team and why do we have them?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. We're made up of suicide loss survivors. Okay. So as Cynthia mentioned, that she is a loss survivor herself, and I'm a loss survivor as well. Some of us have multiple suicide losses in our experience, whether it be family members or close friends that have ended their lives by suicide. And so it became apparent through working with a number of individuals years ago in Lincoln that there was an opportunity to reach out to suicide loss survivors and provide them support as soon as possible after the loss. Mm-hmm. And having peers, others who have experienced suicide loss, to be able to connect with someone as soon as possible after that loss just allows the opportunity to let them know that they're not alone. Because the experience of suddenly, tragically losing someone to suicide is like a tidal wave. It's like a tornado suddenly. Sometimes it's out of the blue, and sometimes families have endured sometimes months, maybe years of internal family crises where they've been involved with mental health therapists, law enforcement, battling to sustain that person's life, but then that person ends their lives. And so certainly how one ends their life leaves in her wake suicide loss survivors, whether they're adults or children or youth. In fact, that's one of the keys, I think, with loss teams across Nebraska and across the country, is that not only are we able to provide support soon, but also we provide follow-up care. And follow-up care is simply providing an opportunity to reach out through a phone call, through a visit, through dropping something in the mail, letting them know they're not alone. That's really critical.
Well, getting resources, I would think, quickly would be important, and having somebody who sadly had to go through the same thing, being able to talk with them would be, I guess, for lack of a better word, reassuring on being able to, because you're just like you said, in a whirlwind, and having somebody be able to grab your hand and start walking you through the processes of what's going to happen in your life from then on out, from mental health to planning funerals and things of that nature.
Sheriff, sometimes we have these resources that in the community, and it feels like they've always been there, but we've only had loss here actively for just over 10 years now. Prior to that, can you remember any other groups in Lincoln that provided a similar service?
I really can't. That's interesting. No, I can't think of anybody that we could turn to as an agency, as a resource. And I know that individuals could always seek out help on their own, but that's not always a common thing, is it, Don? People they don't know who to reach out to.
Not knowing who to reach out to is a challenge. The other challenge is a stigma that's associated with a suicide loss. So, and certainly each individual who experiences loss responds differently, depending upon their culture, depending on their experience, depending upon development, where they're at in life. But one thing is clear, they're in pain, and so trying to find an opportunity to connect with someone becomes critical. So loss team members who, we don't do therapy. It's not a therapeutic process. It's a peer-to-peer experience. Now, our loss team teams are made up of 2 loss team individuals generally who are suicide loss members, as well as licensed mental health clinicians. And so and that's a pretty unique kind of process that we've established in Nebraska to really have that goal in mind, is to have that licensed mental health person there. And that person's there for the safety of the team members as well as the safety of of those who we are connecting with.
So, Cynthia, speaking of the loss team members, you've been a part of loss for some time now. Who makes up a loss team, and what kind of training and preparation goes into that for those team members?
What I'd like to say, what Dr. Don does really well is, I haven't been doing it, I think it's a while. He will also give us our own mental health tests, like twice a year, to see how we're doing on the calls. And we usually have, when we get a call, we usually have 3 to 4 people go out on that call.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is, some scenarios would be, you may have two different family components. You may have the husband and wife, for instance, and maybe the one side is frustrated with the other side. So we don't want to talk with them all as a group. So we will take like 2 of us and go over and talk with the father's side or the mother's side or the sibling side. It depends on how that works.
Okay.
And then also, a city chaplain meets us there sometimes, which is really cool. And I also love how Dr. Don mentioned culture. Suicide affects all different cultures, all different classism. And we have, we seem to have members that cover each one of those components to also go on the call. Like, also we have some that have lost a daughter or son, a sibling, also a sister, uncle, brother, best friends, coworkers, and we have somebody on the team that has that same experience.
Okay, so trying to match up
Right.
survivors with
Right.
similar circumstances is important.
Exactly.
But yeah, you forget about the friends part of it too, and that can just be as devastating on that end of it. So yeah, you don't even think about that. Us as law enforcement, we go there. When you guys started, I was part of the criminal investigator, I was the captain there, and one of our first thoughts that we have on those is, God, I don't want them coming in here and we have a homicide and doing those things. And at first I was a little concerned, but you know what?
Skeptical, I think, is the word.
Yes.
Okay.
Skeptical. The hard-headed old cop. But what a program it turned out to be. And, thankfully I've never had to go through that. But I tell you, I've watched some of your people work, and it's amazing what they do for those families.
And that's a great point to talk about in terms of what we actually do when we walk into that room. And that room could be in the family residence, or it could be in a hotel room, in a conference room, or it could be in a police station or a fire department station. We've done loss calls in everywhere you can imagine where our teams have met with people. And so that allows us that flexibility to connect early. And then within that call process, and generally these are calls that we call them calls because they're visits actually.
Right.
So when we visit with a group of people, a family, there's a certain rhythm to that call.
Maybe could you kind of walk us through the anatomy of what one of those calls looks like, or how how does loss work for these suicide loss survivors?
Sure, absolutely. So Cynthia can kind of help me out as we go through this. So to actually kind of rotate this back a little bit, so we received the a notification that there has been a suicide from law enforcement primarily, and that's our primary referral source is law enforcement.
Okay.
So we'll receive a call. And so our loss team coordinator, who's on call 24/7 with a phone number that's active, will receive that call, and then will notify the team as to the details of that loss and organize that team to be able to respond. So before that happens, the law enforcement has connected with those family members and said, hey, in Lincoln, we have a loss team. Local Outreach to Suicide Survivor Team. So whether it be LSO or LPD, the detectives or law enforcement or whoever will hopefully say, these folks are available. We'd like to call them. Can we call them and let them know? So most of the time, families will say, absolutely, please call. Mm-hmm. And so then we receive that call and then we move forward. So then we're getting ready to go into that. We've assembled. We're ready to walk into that room. Our team basically takes a couple of deep breaths because even though we're lost survivors, we don't know who we're going into. We don't know what the situation is, so it's important for us to be calm as we move forward.
So before you said when we enter that call, we also meet in a general area first. So we don't go in our own, vehicles and we all go together as one unit. So we don't have 5 vehicles in front of their house.
Yeah.
We all get there at the same time. I wanted to include that since you were on that path.
You bet. Thank you. That's exactly right. Because we don't want the neighbor to have 5 different cars.
Right.
And you mentioned too when we were preparing for this episode, you're not a first responder, you're an early responder.
Exactly. We designed it in Nebraska to be an early responder rather than a first responder. Mm-hmm. First responder implies that we'll be arm in arm with law enforcement and rescue unit. Mm-hmm. And in Nebraska, we opted not to design our loss teams that way. So early respond means that we are able to respond as soon as what we can, meaning whenever the families or whoever are willing to accept us.
Okay.
So it's a voluntary acceptance. Now, there are some teams across the country who operate a little bit differently, depending on the locality. That's why we call it local outreach to suicide loss survivors, because it depends upon the jurisdiction and process. She mentioned she's from, spent a good amount of time in Miami. Just within this past year, we, meaning the loss team movement, has implemented in Miami I believe it counts up to 7 loss teams.
Oh, wow.
In Miami
Alone.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So but they look a lot different than what we do in Nebraska in many ways. So it just depends. That's why the key idea is to meet with that family and provide to them the idea that they're not alone, and provide them the opportunity that there are resources available. So we give each family, each group that we see, handouts. As we can see here, folders oftentimes, and for full of different materials. And for children, for example, under the age of 10, we'll have a bag with coloring books, and we'll have a teddy bear in it, and something that's useful for a child to connect with. And for the teenager, we may give something a little bit different for them to access and to process. So part of that follow-up care is that when we call back, we'll say, have you had a chance to look at that stuff? Have you had a chance? Because oftentimes, people just lay it down because they're not ready.
Well, and they've got a lot of things.
Got a lot of things
to think about, yeah.
A lot of things going on. So that's the importance of follow-up care, is being able to reconnect and be able to encourage them seeking mental health counseling or counseling with, or connecting with the local community that they feel comfortable with, whether it be faith community or whatever.
And how long are you typically on scene, or maybe if you're not on scene, but at whatever location is agreed upon, how long are you usually there to meet with the family? Yeah,
that's a great question, because the average would probably, if we would average it out, would probably be somewhere around 60 minutes, somewhere in that 45, 60-minute range. I would also say to you, it could be up to a couple hours, but it could be less too. It just depends on the flexibility of the process. One of the keys that we have been able to, key supports we've been able to provide is, as loss teams across the country, is, and this may be something as a good reminder to you guys, if you receive notification that a family in Lancaster County has experienced a suicide loss, say in Colorado, and the law enforcement calls you to inform you that this has happened, we're happy to assist you.
Or we make notification that we do.
Exactly. Yeah. We're happy to assist you with that notification.
Oh.
Meaning that, we would be able to call us. We would then connect with that family as well, to be with you perhaps at the same time or later, where you give them information that there is a loss team that's available. So certainly in the last several years, there has been a few occasions where we've helped LPD, for example, with that particular process.
And that's one thing I think our guys don't know, because, we do sadly have to make a lot of death notifications from out of county, out of the area. And if we don't really know what's happened to the person, but I would assume we would be able to, and that's an excellent idea. I never even thought about that part, and that would be one time you could almost be a first responder with us, to be right there and ready to go.
It's possible that we would process. We'd talk about that. We've received we've talked a little bit about the referral source being from law enforcement primarily. Since COVID, we've received a lot of referrals from families who have moved into the area, who have lost someone somewhere else. They find out about us, and they connect with us, and they ask us for support. The other part of that sort of sponsor or support is that if someone ends their life in Lincoln, for example, and we have a loss team in Chadron, and we have a loss team in Metro. With that family's permission, we'd reach out to that other loss team and let them know that there is something that's available for them.
Right.
So we have built a network of support, and I think that's critical. Terry, you mentioned something that was really very true. And that was that prior to the beginning of the loss team in Lincoln, across the country, postvention or suicide loss had been largely ignored because of stigma. But thankfully, in the last 15 years or so, we're seeing that switch. We're seeing a lot of support.
I think prior to that time, you saw suicide run in families. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's what prompted the initiation of LOSS teams was that.
Got to break that chain somewhere, right?
You got to break that chain and try to make sure that folks can receive those services they need to carry on.
It's interesting you mention that because the very origin of a LOSS team took place in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and for exactly the same reasons. The coroner had discovered that there had been a familial loss and said, we got to stop that cycle. Mm. And that really started the whole movement many, many years ago because that county coroner reached out to someone and said, what can we do to stop this?
You can call me Dr. Terry, too.
the one with the good hair.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey, I'm Captain John Vik with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. When it comes to your career, don't settle for good enough. Don't settle for ordinary. We won't either. Be different, be better, be exceptional. Start your future today at joinlso.com. I have a question about that, and it's something that we encounter sometimes when we deal with crime victims. We had Barb Dodge on here talking about when her husband Craig was a deputy for us that was killed, and families sometimes end up in a situation where they're not even being asked to join, but they're joining a club that they didn't want to be a part of. And do you ever encounter that maybe resistance to your services or someone that has that stigma or whatever you want to call it, that I don't want to talk to you because I don't want to be in that club?
I think I have several thoughts with that. One is, it's one of the reasons when they hear about the LOSS team and we say we are also survivors, I want to clarify, sometimes they think we also are the ones that have tried suicide ourselves. It's not. We are survivors of the loved ones that have killed themselves by suicide. Mm-hmm. And
I was hoping you would define that.
Yeah, so I'm going to define that. And then also we always say, the new term everyone's saying is a new normal. What we always refer to as like a puzzle. You have a puzzle. And you don't have that puzzle that there's always one piece missing. Mm-hmm. The rest of your life you're going to learn somehow that you continue, but you always have one piece missing. Mm-hmm. And so when we go on the calls, we like he said, we've been trained and with our personal experience. Hey, for me, it's been 5, 10 years or 2 years. We know what this feels like. I can't tell you how you feel, but I want you to know we know that it's different. And also the taboo-ness of the topic. And with faith-based, too, I want to share that we never tell anyone how to feel or think. Mm-hmm. We're very open, and we follow what their thoughts are. And I think that's important to say, too.
Yeah. I'm kind of a mission statement junkie, so forgive me, but one of the things that I saw on your website that I really like, it says, the LOSS team's mission is to help assist in beginning a journey towards hope. Yeah. How does that look practically for the LOSS team, that journey towards hope?
I see this as a way that peers are able to install hope.
Okay. By
just being there and saying to that person who is experiencing that pain and anguish that there is we're going to be with you on this journey. Mm. There are others. You are now part of a club. Mm-hmm. No one invited you in the club. You didn't apply for membership, but you're now part of a club of people who are going to support you. Mm-hmm. Because when we start talking about the experience of suicide loss, that pain and anguish that goes with that, we're able to say to you that there is a way to move forward. And part of the way to move forward with your life is is continue to be connected with positive people. Being connected and be able to move forward, because the stigma that does surround suicide loss is still with us because of a lot of different reasons that it's still there. So part of our training of our suicide loss teams is to talk about caring language and language not to use. Mm-hmm. It's because one of the keys that oftentimes it comes out in a dialogue with suicide loss survivors at the scene, at the location, is that often we'll say, there's going to be a lot of folks who will say some things that that's going to be hurtful. It's going to hurt, and so I call it foot and mouth disease. and I talk to folks about, be aware. Your neighbor, your minister,
and they mean well, but they just don't know what to say.
Yeah, so we talk about grace. It's important for that as a suicide loss survivor that we remember that the others don't intend, but they don't know what words to use, so we just use words.
Yeah.
So it's helpful. It's amazing that through the years that we've been doing this, that message I just shared with you oftentimes is one of the key messages that folks remember and tell us years later that made a difference. That made a difference for them as they move forward in their journey of hope.
But you guys are role models too. I mean, sitting there and looking at it and go, they made it through, I can make it through too. And just seeing you guys and how you and what you're doing now. Have you ever gotten people that you have worked with now or are part of your team here in Lincoln?
You share because you would know the more members.
Sure. Yes, we have, and it's sometimes it's years later, and we also have found that in a few occasions, children who experience a loss within the family who are now adults seek us out to be a member. And what's intriguing is that their parents talked about that loss visit or receives resources that help them move forward. So those children grew up and had that idea, boy, that's something I want to do to help someday.
Wow. Yeah.
So we're starting to see that legacy, not only in Lincoln, because we're seeing it in Lincoln, but across the nation we're seeing that as well.
To break down that stigma.
Exactly.
Also, what you were just talking about that some aren't aware of, what we also do, because it is such a taboo subject in our society, that as some of us members, when that funeral comes about, they don't know what. Some are still worried about what are people going to say, what's my church going to say too, and we will go to the funeral with them to support them. And that's different too.
I've been to funerals of suicide victims, and some of them have been good, and some they just skirt the issue. They never mention
the elephant in the room.
Yeah, the cause of death. Right. They just, but I've been to others where they did a great job acknowledging that this person was in so much pain. So it goes both ways. And
it does.
This is. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that the key, I think, for any of us when we work with someone who's experienced suicide loss is to encourage them to be connected and remind them that there is hope. There is hope to move forward. It's okay to look forward. Christmas is a difficult time of year for many families who have experienced suicide loss, particularly within the past 3 or 4 months. There's an empty chair. There's an empty seat at the table. So families will struggle with that. And what we suggest to families is to talk about it. Talk about the fact Christmas is here. Let's talk about ways to honoring that memory and celebrating the memory of that person in terms of they're part of our family. We don't want to see that family member who's ended by suicide to be suddenly ignored and forgotten.
Yeah.
Tossed out. Yeah,
tossed out.
That'd be horrible.
We do. So for the healing of the family and hoping for the family to grow and recover and move forward, it's important that connecting and talking. If they find it difficult to connect with each other because one doesn't want to be a burden, and so say one family member was hesitant to share because they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to make things worse. In reality, that creates some really difficult confusion. So what we're hopeful that suicide loss survivors can do is to talk with each other. If they find it difficult, find someone to help them. Help them talk through it, to raise that elephant in the room and to address it. there is no clear answer, but what we do know by talking helps diffuse that emotional confusion, that anger, but letting that we're in this together.
How about the feeling of guilt? Do you have to fight that with that on a lot of individuals and how they feel about that?
Yeah, that's exactly the reason why we encourage individuals to seek help, seek resources. That's that level of survivor guilt rears its head in a lot of different ways. And so the why questions, why did this happen? That's directly connected with guilt. So suicide loss survivors find their way of coping with that why, coping with that guilt, again, by connecting and being able to walk the path. And oftentimes loss survivors find strength in being able to help other loss survivors by reaching out to others. So that work allows them to continue to heal themselves as well. So the survivor guilt is like gas. You throw it on the fire, it can blaze intensely. So in order to manage that, one has to really connect.
Well, I was wondering, like on the grief cycle, there's anger and so on and so forth. Does suicide add another dimension to that you have to overcome before you can forgive, or whatever the case may be toward the victim?
Terry, you're right on target. Suicide loss is dramatically different than other types of loss, whether it be loss due to, say, cancer. Cancer loss is different. Loss as a result of a traumatic event in a car accident is different. The piece that's different, there's two pieces that are different. And speaking as a clinician is the trauma. Until the trauma of the experience is managed and dealt with in some way, it is difficult to begin grieving. So the trauma is connected oftentimes with discovering the body.
I was going to just ask that question.
Discovering the body in the bathroom, discovering the body, that individual somewhere, that trauma. And that trauma is a process of coping with that. And that's why we ask folks, encourage them, seek help, particularly mental health help to help deal with the trauma of that exposure. That trauma exposure is challenging. It's challenging for law enforcement. And for law enforcement to walk into a situation and see that trauma, it's challenging.
But I couldn't imagine knowing the person and how much more it would cause an emotion on, because unfortunately we've all had to experience those kind of events in our careers. But walking in the family and knowing them and loving them, and I can't even hardly wrap my mind about how horrible that would be.
But I would imagine there's another element to it too. Sometimes death by suicide can kind of catch people out of nowhere, but other times there's a lot of trauma that leads up to that. Maybe it's a struggle with drugs and alcohol. Maybe it's a struggle with depression or some other mental illness.
Terminal illness.
That not only is that person dealing with, but the family is dealing with some of the fallout from that for sometimes years, and so I could certainly see how it's different, like you said.
One of the processes that postvention is learning about is that we're learning how long-term survivors are coping and what works for them, and so we really, within the field of suicidology, if you will, which studies suicide prevention as well as postvention, the area of postvention, we're just now learning what's really working.
Yeah.
What helps that long-term suicide survivor. And part of what we've learned, and we continue to learn, is that peer support. But here's the key, though, with support in general, it needs to be trusted. I have to share with you that there are different websites, if you will, that are not trustworthy, and that they will honestly pop up, if you will, and then they will embrace that person, take their money, sell whatever, and then they just disappear. So you have this sort of element. But there are trusted sources, and one of them, for example, is Alliance of Hope, and that's ran by suicide loss survivors. It's national. It's actually international. It's 24/7. Loss teams connect with them, and we certainly trust them. So so when we have that 24/7 support that type of website can offer at 3:00 Saturday morning, and you're grieving and you're hurting and you don't know where to go, you can go to that website and have an engagement with that's trusted. Of course, and we also encourage folks to, in our packets now, we leave with folks is resources such as 988. If you're feeling a sense of suicidal crisis, right, here's a number to call. Or in Lincoln, we'll use a center point number, for a crisis number. So we provide a variety of resources for that group.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
Cynthia, this is maybe a good spot to talk about, why there is this effort to support suicide loss survivors. And I know you had some statistics too on just some of the numbers, just to put this in perspective for people.
Well, thank you. And since we have this mic, I wanted to also honor our law enforcement and our first responders in these statistics in a sad way, and just educate, I guess. What I would like to say, they say that we're in the Midwest, and believe it or not, Nebraska and Iowa have the higher rates of suicide among veterans. Yet, you hear that number 22 in one day. Good news with that a little bit, it's actually gone down.
Okay.
And they say it's 18.
Okay.
All right.
Still too high.
It's still too high, yes. And then with just with numbers, being a mama bear of 2 soldiers myself, serving right now, after 9/11, we lost over 30,000 of our veterans to suicide. That's the size of Kearney.
Wow.
That's a lot. And in that same period, we lost 7,000 soldiers in active duty fighting. So that number is huge.
Yeah, and I know we talk about that in law enforcement too, that we are dying by our own hand,
right?
Just as much as we're dying, from some sort of felonious assault or duty-related accident. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it's because, you're trained. You're trained to be tough all the time, and that's what we want to get out there, that this can affect, like I said earlier, any background.
Yeah.
And especially the field. They say also for police officers that within the first year of retirement, suicide can also be higher. Yet for the next 10 years, and you said earlier too, you also have to put not just the job itself, but it can be outside factors such as, stress of family, finances, and some of that. So we have to be
alcoholism.
careful. Exactly what you said, addiction is included to some of those suicide higher rates.
And Sheriff, I know it seems like every so often, we'll be talking in the morning and did you hear about so-and-so? Or did you hear about so-and-so? And sometimes, like Cynthia mentioned, it is that transition where, especially in our line of work, and there's other lines of work like that too, but, we're very drawn to that sense of service and purpose and even an identity to some extent, that it's hard for people to transition out of that.
Yeah, to go from this line of work where you can where you feel like you've made a huge difference,
and
then go sell cars. Not that selling cars isn't important, but it just doesn't have the impact on people's lives that law enforcement does, and so it's really difficult for some folks to move into a different area of their life that just doesn't seem to carry the weight that they need or the purpose that they need.
Well, and another thing, we are so educated on firearms and weapons that we are very successful at getting the job done, for the lack of something better to say. On when law enforcement decides to do it, they use the firearm, and that's sadly effective.
Yeah.
I would mention to you that an awareness of that tendency has been noticed across the country, and there's one state in particular, I believe it is actually Louisiana, who has just recently, within the last few months, has formed a Louisiana state loss team made up of only state patrolmen.
Really?
And so that they're able to respond to, because there's a high incidence of law enforcement deaths in Louisiana, they have formed, I believe, 3 loss teams that are focused on law, providing support to law enforcement. So that allows for hope and also allows for moving forward.
Certainly. When we were preparing for this too, you'd mentioned, these are local teams, and some local teams have a much higher rhythm and pace, sadly, than others. What is the pace of calls?
By pace, you mean the number of calls?
Yeah, the number, or how frequently are your teams going out?
Like monthly, or
In Lincoln, we're approaching in terms of a number of suicide losses. We're approaching 35, 36 so far this year. And that's unfortunate. And as was mentioned, across ages and gender. Of those losses, we tend to respond to between a fourth and a half of those losses in some way. All those losses receive some type of support, but in person kind of responses. We're still coming out of COVID, in terms of the adjustment within society and so forth to having someone else coming into their home. So I think that's one reason why it's not a higher percentage. In Metro and Omaha area, that loss team, unfortunately, so far this year, they've experienced nearly 70 losses. So across Nebraska, we continue to have suicide loss, and we have formed. And by the way, Nebraska is the only state in the union that has a state loss team coalition that has state loss teams. So that's we've had that in place for now 5 years and continue to support our loss teams, because our vision is to support loss teams means connection, collaboration, and training. In fact, we have state loss team trainings for our loss teams, and our loss teams across Nebraska are supported by the Nebraska State Suicide Prevention Coalition, which is made up of stakeholders that are dedicated to prevention and postvention throughout the state.
Yeah.
And so we have all different kinds of folks that are involved in promoting that.
So that was my next one of my questions was, how are you funded? Obviously, your loss team members are volunteers, but there's still some expenses to bear. And so how are you funded? And
each loss team finds its own way to find its funding, frankly. And for example, in Kearney, the Buffalo, the South Central loss team, they have different funding sources, including volleyball. They have a sand volleyball tournament every year, or they also may have some other type of fundraising. In Lincoln, we have different fundraising process as well. Same way with Metro. So each area kind of figures that out on their own, and I think that's healthy because that reinforces that notion of local outreach, and so we that allows that focus. So it's not state funded. Now, there are grants that are available, different sources. So private foundations do sometimes offer grants. We have one loss team who is connected with United Way. So that's very useful for that loss team. So that's one. There are costs. The costs are generally managing the website, managing the phone, so it's 24/7. Materials we put in, we hand out, and that kind of thing. So it depends upon the area in terms of what the budget might look like.
So if somebody, do you accept donations?
Absolutely. On our website, the Nebraska LOSS Team website, there is a button that one can press. In fact, anyone in the state anywhere can use that website to donate, contribute money, and then we make sure it goes to the correct loss team.
That's you bring up a good point. Let's talk about your website. Where can people go to learn more information about the LOSS Team and connecting with your services?
Yeah, so actually, the easiest thing to say is Google Nebraska LOSS Team. Okay. And that'll pop up.
Okay.
And also, I would mention to you that for the Lincoln LOSS Team, the number is 402-440-1633. Again, it's 402-440-1633. That number is available for the law enforcement. It's available for the community who would wish to have more information about the LOSS Team work, perhaps how to apply to become a member of the LOSS Team. So, and remember this is a peer-driven effort. So, and there's screening that takes place. There's training that takes place before one can go so that we can ensure the safety of all who are participating. Cynthia mentioned a process that I think is useful, that when we talk about training and also going on calls, we have a debriefing process, because we need to debrief our team members to give them an opportunity to process the experience.
I'm sure
after every call.
there's some it brings back the trauma that team members felt during their time of crisis as well. That just dawned on me.
It can. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So when people come and become a peer support, how long do they stay? Are they lifers, or do you have any idea how that works?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a lot of lifers.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, we do.
Mm-hmm. I'm one of them.
Yeah, we do. In Lincoln, we have presently on our roll, we have about 24 LOSS Team members.
Oh, wow.
And so they are probably out of that 24, we have a dozen or so, 16 are really easily available. And we'll tend to mix and try to match.
Yeah, sure.
We have some of our LOSS Team members, as I mentioned, are veterans. Mm-hmm. So if we receive a call that the loss was connected with a veteran, we'll try to match that up as well. So that's helpful.
What if there's someone out there that's listening to this podcast right now, and maybe they had a loss to suicide 5, 10, 15 years ago, but maybe the LOSS program either wasn't offered to them or they weren't aware of it. Can they still reach out to the LOSS Team?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And we may not, a loss call may not be necessary, but we can certainly offer resources. Okay. We can say, well, you might want to try this and this. That might feel comfortable for you at this point. And we are starting to see, as I mentioned before, long-term survivor resources that are available. And I think those are pretty interesting to find out how that's working. Alliance of Hope is one that offers both short-term bereavement as well as long-term bereavement, which is other resources.
So, and then maybe on the other side of that coin, maybe there's someone out there that's listening that says, I have gone through this, I have suffered a loss like this, and I want to get involved and give back. How does someone like that get involved with loss and begin that process of being a team member?
Well, once again, I would encourage to call the number.
Okay, so the 402-440-1633.
Correct.
And that would put them in touch with the team.
Yes, it would.
That number is available 24/7.
Okay, and then from there they would kind of just be walked through that process, or how did that work for you, Cynthia?
Well, I went through. I think I got Dr. Don's phone number right away, but like he said, back up a minute. He's very good about if this is really right for you too, even all that screening process. I really admire that he does that with all our members. And then again, I just want to say it does a nice job of this group. So we have come together where we support each other all the time, which is nice. You don't have that in all it's not, outlets.
Sure.
And so I think that's why we've been around for a while now.
It's that common common connection there that you've all experienced.
Exactly.
Let me ask you a quick question. I know a number of states have legalized suicide for terminally ill patients. How do you see that in the future, and how do you see that affecting their family members?
Heavy question.
I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. It's one that in Nebraska, at least, we haven't processed yet. And I'm not sure any loss team across the country has yet dealt with that particular scenario that you just described.
Well, I know Washington State has legalized it for terminally ill patients and that sort of thing, and I didn't know how that fit into the mix.
Yeah, I think what am I envisioning of direction that things may move to, I think the door would be open for those individuals. It could be that maybe there'll be a development of loss teams made up of peers who have had similar experience, where they have had a loved one who ended their life through that process. And in my mind, in terms of peer-to-peer healing, that would be probably the next step that might come about, perhaps in the state of Washington and other states. I think what Cynthia talked about a while ago that was crystal clear, and I appreciate Cynthia saying this, is that this is a team that's not made up of suicide attempt survivors.
Right.
Okay, so the fact is that's just not the nature of this particular effort. So I would suspect as years progress or months progress that the loss teams probably could formulate themselves something to respond to that particular scenario.
So where the L in loss is local. And
Exactly.
You tailor it to fit your needs.
Exactly.
Your local. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that pretty much bring us up to speed? Are there any other closing thoughts today?
Do you have any stories of one that you did that you would want to share, or anything on that? Like I said, I don't use names and things, but I think people like the personal touch of what happens and how has it helped you guys, and your thoughts in dealing with certain situations.
Or how have you seen it benefit the Lincoln Lancaster County community specifically?
Boy, that's a question where there's a lot of different pieces to it. It's like an octopus with a lot of different tentacles to it. And I think that's kind of where Lincoln Lancaster County community is. We become part of the community culture. In fact, there are a number of gun stores, for example, who are connected with us from prevention and post-prevention point of view. There are different funeral homes, if you will, are connected with us. Faith communities. There seems like we are becoming more and more enmeshed as time goes on, where folks are recognizing, hey, a loss team. School counselors are recognizing here's a loss team that's available. If I have students who experience suicide loss, I'm going to give them something. I'm going to give that number a call. Because it's all about promoting that healing. In terms of stories and experiences, Cynthia, I'm sure, Cynthia is a tried and treasured member of our loss team. She represents so much in terms of creativity and sensitivity that and virtually all our loss team members bring to our team unique creativity, unique pieces. But I think one of the cases that kind of stands out in my mind on a call that I've been on within the past year has been a situation where as we were leaving the environment, someone had mentioned to us as we were leaving. And by the way, hugs are free. By the way,
okay.
But as we were leaving, hugged us all and said, "I'm so thankful that you guys came, because it's great to know we're not alone." And that seems to be a repetitive sort of pattern, that particularly since COVID, that we're back to that area where we can receive and give hugs as we go and receive that sort of support. So I think that's what's meaningful as part of our healing, I think, too, as we move forward.
And I also want to add, you're asking a specific question, and one of the reasons we may be towing around it is all our members are very confidential.
Right.
So, and you said that too. So, Lincoln is small, and we have a nice number of members, and because of that number, it seems like monthly, when someone dies by suicide, it's odd in a way one of us know about it, where there's a connection, a member actually. And so we have that connection. And I think to add with that, we've had some areas where unlikely ways to kill yourself is odd. That may be an imprint that's different that on other calls, and then ages, young age and older ages. I will say that. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we just sincerely appreciate the work that you and your organization do, and the time that you spent with us today, just providing some information about a subject that isn't always easy to talk about, but that's really why loss is there. I guess at the end of the day is to provide that journey back to hope.
Yeah, we hate to have you, but we love you that we do.
Yes.
And you're one of the few organizations that are in our SOP, that our standardized operation procedure, that this is one thing that we do during these events, and is to make that phone call. And there's not that many organizations that do that.
Not only it helps the families, the survivors, but it really helps us. So thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. That is all the time that we have for today's episode of the 902 podcast. This episode did discuss suicide. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also text HOME, HOME, to 741-741, or visit speakingofsuicide.com for additional resources and information. If you have additional questions about the Nebraska LOSS Team, visit nebraskaloss.org. Also, be sure to follow the 902 podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts, so that you can be sure to catch future and past episodes of public safety-related content related to Lancaster County. If you have questions about careers at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, be sure to visit joinlso.com, and also check us out on social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Thanks for listening.